Hey everybody, we're still here and it's Sunday, so we'll do our thing again. Already in the chat, we have Teddy, Humdrum, Martin, and Old Hoss. And yes, I do appreciate not having a burnt tongue. I'm very happy not to have that anymore. Yeah, the swollen gums aren't anywhere near as painful, but they're sore, especially when I brush, because they're sore on both sides where the problem tooth has been. But I do have a temporary crown in there, so on the back tooth next to it. So I'm just hoping, when they're done working on that side, they can work on other things, and then eventually I'll be able to chew on the right side and give that side a rest. And, hoping all that works out. Hey, Clutch and James Mason and Soundleaves. Waiting on Thanksgiving dinner. It must be, that must be in Canada. I think it's a different time than ours. Ours isn't until late next month, fourth Thursday. But yeah, that's always nice to have some kind of progress. You'll get booted. I don't know why, but anyway, what we're going to talk about today is Christians and education, because I look for underlying things, as always, and this is another one that's kind of relate to other things, videos I've done in recent weeks. Hey Rachel, good to see you too, and whoever else comes in later, because I need to be focusing on what I'm doing, so the rest of you can say hi to whoever shows up. And so what I have on the screen here is an article from PJ Media that was on the 5th, so only less than a week ago. 427,000 parents respond to National School Board Association labeling them domestic terrorists. And there's some good points made in this stuff, so I'm going to read through some of it. And, I'll probably read the whole thing here. So I'm not going to do the extended, but it says there was a hysterical and threatening letter written by the National School Board Association president. And the letter is sent to none other than the so-called president. Let's go Brandon. If you know what that means, look it up. # Let's go Brandon. Garcia accused America's concerned parents of threats, intimidation, and even hate crimes rising to the level of domestic terrorism for having the gall to speak up at their local school board meetings. That's all it really is. If you've been paying any attention at all, if you're in the U.S. especially, to recordings of people standing before school boards to protest various things, they have that right. It's a constitutional right to speak up. And I've never seen any where they threaten school board members with violence. The NSBA also requested federal assistance to stop threats, just the threats, and acts of violence, what acts of violence, against school board members, school officials, and teachers. This week, however, the leaders of almost 24 parent organizations fired back with a scathing letter of their own, written on behalf of the members of several organizations. And it says, NSBA cites a tiny number of minor incidents in order to insinuate that parents who are criticizing and protesting the decisions of school boards are engaging in or may be engaging in domestic terrorism and hate crimes. They even invoked the Patriot Act. The association of legitimate protest with terrorism, there's the key, and violence, reveals both your contempt for parents and your unwillingness to understand and hear the sincere cries of parents on behalf of their children. To equate parents with terrorists dishonors the thousands of victims of actual terrorism around the world. Have you no shame? Of course, that's a rhetorical question. They have no shame. And that's the end of the quote. The parent organizations pointed out that the NSBA's call for the federal government to use its power, that is to say the FBI, against parents was in itself a menacing and thinly veiled threat. Who's the terrorist now? It's the school board and the feds. Intended to intimidate into silence and submission the very constituents that the NSBA members ostensibly represent. I mean, they are taxpayer funded. They answer to the parents, not the parents answering to them. But they don't see it that way, because once you give people power, they don't want to give it up. I mean, and they really didn't have power. They had responsibility to represent the wishes of the parents, and they have long ago forgotten it. Then it goes on, I mean, what else would you call asking the president to sic the Department of Justice, the FBI, Homeland Security, the Secret Service Assessment Center, and the Postal Service on America's parents? By contrast, America's parent organizations unequivocally oppose violence and are made up not of domestic terrorists, but concerned citizens who care deeply about their community's children and are concerned by the direction America's schools have taken. It's no secret many parents across the country are angry with what's happening or not happening in our taxpayer-funded schools. And hello, more people. Quote, citizens are angry that school boards and school officials around the country are restricting access to public meetings, limiting public comment, and in some cases conducting business via text messages in violation of state open meetings laws. They are breaking the law. They're angry that schools are charging them thousands of dollars in public records requests to view curriculum and training materials that impact their children and that should be open to the public by default. They're angry that pandemic-related learning losses have compounded the already low reading, writing, and math proficiency rates in America's schools. America rates pretty darn low according to, in comparison to other so-called first world nations that aren't going to be first world much longer, when it comes to these basics, because that isn't the goal, and we'll see more about that later. Parents are angry rather than working to improve student achievement so our children actually learn in our country's schools. Large numbers of districts have chosen to fund, often with hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money, social justice and diversity, equality, and inclusion programs with finite resources. And we all know who's not included in diversity and inclusion. It's very revealing that instead of listening to and addressing the concerns of parents, the NSBA chose to smear their constituents rather than engage them in good faith. The concerns of parents are, of course, due to the leftist policies embraced and implemented by the schools boards that are supposedly accountable to the parents of their respective districts. It's appalling that they would choose to threaten your fellow Americans for having the courage to hold you accountable for your failures. They are failing to teach children what the parents want because they've never been about that. And again, as we'll see in a little bit, we will not be bullied. We will not have our speech chilled. We have a constitutional right to petition our elected officials, and we will continue to do so in order to address and improve the quality of America's public education system for all children. Bravo to Americans' parents, grandparents, and concerned citizens for not being intimidated by the NSBA's shameful tactics and for putting America's children first in the face of blatant leftist bullying. So I got nothing to disagree with in that article. Again, this is PJ Media. Let me get you the link. I've been forgetting to do that. And because I've got 4 or 5 links today. But that's just one thing. And I'm still building up to the point about Christian education. So now we're going to look at this next one. So let me give you that link too while I'm remembering to do links in the chat. Florida mom's response. See, this is BCN, Breaking Christian News. Florida mom's response to Department of Justice, that's DOJ, crackdown, gets standing ovation at Virginia VA event. I really think at this point the only thing to do is to have a mass exodus from the public school system. Standing ovation for that. And good for them. Says Florida mom Keisha King, I guess this is her in the little picture here. I don't know how much you can see, but if I blow it up, it goes off the screen. Received a standing ovation when she rebuffed the National School Boards Association, NSBA, and the Biden administration, potentially, which we all know is the Obama administration. They let that slip the other day. Nancy Pelosi, who should be tried for treason, among all of them should be the so-called swamp critters that we have in Washington, D.C. Anyway, potentially cracking down on concerned individuals, including parents who confront their local school boards. Speaking at the Family Research Council's annual Pray, Vote, Stand Summit in Virginia, on Thursday, King called for a mass exodus from public schools with this FBI thing, that is to say, using the FBI to go after parents who stand up for their children at school board meetings, as is their constitutional right. It just made me realize, what else are we supposed to do? Standing up to these people doesn't seem to matter. I mean, we all of us have been in these school board meetings and we've been voicing our opinions, we're writing articles, we're emailing teachers, we're doing all that stuff, and they don't care. I'm like, the only thing left to do is just peace out. In other words, you can read the full story if you want, but she's basically going to reiterate that same point. The thing to do when it gets this bad is to opt out. And a lot of people don't know they can. At least in this country, you can still homeschool. AIJM and DOM and More Than a Flame and everybody else. So those two are a backdrop to what I'm going to say about Christians in education, because so far we haven't seen anything about Christians here, have we? And remember, it's taxation without representation was why the whole original Tea Party happened, rebelling against being taxed by the crown in England and having no representation, though. That's exactly how it is now. It's taxation without representation. If your kids don't go to government schools, but your taxes pay the salaries of these boards and bureaucrats that call you terrorists. They don't seem to realize, a lot of people don't, even a lot of Christians don't realize, that the government has and produces nothing. It takes money from the citizens in the form of taxes by force, and then uses their money to do things they don't want done. And they're supposed to answer to us. Of, for, and by the people. The government's supposed to be it, but it's a farce, and it's not practice at all, and nobody in government, very few voices stand up at all. But is it Christians standing up to this tyranny? Are we on the front lines of standing against this sort of thing? No. Why are our churches mostly conditioning Christians to accept and encourage the anti-Christian indoctrination of their children in taxpayer-funded schools? Remember that one time where I went over the criticisms of the pre-trib rapture, where they accused us, only pre-trib churches, of encouraging this capitulation of government, which is a total lie. Yes, in Germany, homeschooling is prohibited. That's been since, I think, World War II, if I'm not mistaken, because they didn't want certain teachings being done at home. But what's the cost of that? That means you can't rebel against the government. It's just insane and devious. But the thing is, if Christians aren't standing up, and so many of them are, regardless of their prophecy views, which many of them don't even have because they don't study it, why do Christian parents act surprised at how many of their children turn from the faith or become so politically anti-Christian they aid and abet the criminals running our world? I've even seen a BLM t-shirt worn by a member of our little church's worship team. You know what BLM stands for? Burn, loot, murder. The excuse I was given was that the person was probably young and probably meant that all lives matter. But you know what? You can say all lives matter. That's what Christians should do. I mean, when it comes to other things like abortion, Christians have been known as pro-life. Well, why don't all lives matter? Why do we have to single out some lives? Because if you think only a certain skin color is discriminated against and isn't, that people aren't valuing their lives. Well, what about half the body of Christ of women? I went over that a little bit last week. So, you know what? Especially, I think if you're on a worship team, you're up there on stage, that picking a political side is probably a really bad idea, and nobody wears a BLM t-shirt because they think all lives matter. They just don't. Anyway, the root of anti-Christian worldviews is the point I'm getting at. And the political climate that opposes freedom of religion at all levels is a Christian community that marginalizes and dismisses the importance of teaching its own values to its own people. This is why I harp so much on Bible study. We don't know what our values are because we get them from the culture. And the culture sways in the wind with whoever's in power, and in power is going to be people who shouldn't have it, and so it's going to be anti-Christian. So we don't stand up to that. Because we don't know how, we don't know what our Christian worldview is supposed to be. And so we have only ourselves to blame. We haven't been salt and light as a group. There are individual exceptions. But as a group, Christianity has utterly failed to be salt and light because it doesn't take its own professed convictions seriously enough to teach and learn the Bible. And we need to do more than give lip service to that. We need to actually study it. And not just a few people to tell the rest of the people what it means. I just have my own channel. I don't, people come here and go as they please. I don't hold any attendance, records or anything like that. I just say, if you want other opinions, go to other channels. And people in churches should be able to talk about these things without anyone saying, we don't want division. I mean, how are you supposed to grow spiritually if you don't do that? But more importantly, for today's topic, how are you supposed to be salt and light as a community if you do things that any group of people could do, even rank atheists. There are, another article I'm going to show you here. This is a PDF actually, so let me copy that link wherever that little command went. And yeah, as far as persecution goes, I mean, it's been happening to Christians as long as there have been Christians in one part of the world or another. But prejudice is prejudice. People have different reasons to be prejudiced against different people. They have forgotten, even in the U.S., that, for example, Irish people were enslaved and hated, or Italian people, and they're all white as far as that goes. And I've said before, one of my ancestors in my family tree was a slave for a while. So yeah, it's never, they don't care. The people who push these narratives and play these cards don't care about people at all. They care about themselves, and that's it. Anyway, this PDF here is about Christian education from someplace, Sunshine Bible Academy. And I'm not endorsing Sunshine Bible Academy. I never heard of them before. I'm not endorsing this Miller person. But they make some good points. Okay? So we're going to read through this PDF quickly, as you know I do. But maybe I'll try to slow down a little bit. But I do have a couple more articles to look at, so I don't want to take too long. Anyway, school is an important part of our society. The purpose of education to most people is to prepare a person for a career, but the focus is on self and individual success. Often defined by worldly standards and not according to Scripture, Christian parents should ask a very important question: what is the purpose of education according to God? Okay? The purpose, and then there's this PDF, sometimes things are converted to PDF and they forget things like little spaces between words. The purpose of education is to know that we were created for Jesus Christ, Colossians 1:16, and knowing this, that we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, love our neighbor as ourselves. Any school that denies God, teaches things contrary to the truth of Scripture, or diminishes his importance, misses the very purpose of education and presents a faulty and destructive worldview. In other words, this is being written to make the case for distinctly Christian education for Christians. Not saying everybody should be forced to be in a Christian school. Okay? The Apostle Paul, they mean here, addressing the church at Colossae, that is to say, the letter to Colossians, wrote that his desire for them would be that they're filled with the knowledge of his will, that is to say, God's will. The end of education is not mere knowledge or a good-paying job. It's that we would be filled with wisdom in making right choices and walking worthy of the Lord and being fruitful in every good work and serving others. As I've said before on my article on education, and let me see if I can go and find that for you. I know I have it here somewhere. Hold on just a second. On my website, because I didn't have this in my notes, obviously, and I wanted to... Well, you can read a whole bunch of things right here. I'm going to give you this features link, and look for the one on education, okay? Anyway, put that away here. The end of education is not mere knowledge or a good-paying job. It is to be filled with wisdom, and as I've said before, and especially regarding the women's issue, when you make any citizen dependent on others completely, or on the government especially, you don't have good citizens and you won't have a strong society. And that's why welfare run amok, as it is in most Western nations, is bad for citizens and makes them dependent little crybabies who will just go along with whoever gives them the most candy. All right. So, through education, our children are acquiring knowledge and developing wisdom that forms their belief system worldwide and ultimately their choices in life. James says there are only two kinds of wisdom: that which is worldly or humanistic and demonic, and that which is from above, that which is godly, pure, and peaceable, and full of good fruit. So, you hear too many people say, I'm going to let my kids just, figure out what's true and what isn't and not give them any guidance at all. But I can guarantee you that if they spend any time with public school educators, so-called, somebody's going to instill their values into your kids, whether you like it or not. And kids do need guidance. If you guide them well, you will say, this is, these are my strong convictions. This is why I believe them. And, here's what other people believe, and here's why I choose to accept this set and not that set. And that's how you teach them how to decide, how you decided. Anyway, they go on here. Sunshine Bible Academy believes and practices that the foundation of all education should be built on the fear of the Lord. I'm going to skip a little bit of that. And then point 2 is what I'm teaching my child being undermined in the classroom. Yes, we could skip a lot and just say, yes, it's being totally undermined, deliberately so. In the question in the chat, in homeschool, do you have to follow the educational curriculum? Yes and no, and it will vary by state in the U.S. But for the most part, mainly they just require a certain number of hours and certain evidence of coursework in basic things like English, math, science, and other things are kind of optional, but there are, they'll give you very general guidelines of the things that are required, and you have to go to someone who is certified, who will examine your child's sample work, and, pass or fail. You don't get grades, you just pass or fail as far as they're concerned, and they satisfy the state requirements. And hopefully you find a homeschool group that has certified people that the homeschool members can go to and have them review your child's work once a year. So there's a lot of responsibility on the parents, but yes, we do have some latitude. And what I personally did, I tried some canned curriculums at first. The first one it turned out to be very strict. It was basically, more strict than public schools for sure, even when I was in, where you basically brought the public school into your house, only you taught them from the Bible, but you still, you had the kid raising their hand to ask questions and all that, and I think that's just asinine. So I ditched that. I tried something else the next year, and then I said, you know what? I can get used public school textbook on eBay for cheap, and we'll go through them and through the questions they have at the end of each chapter, and then me and the children will talk about it, and we can point out the things that we don't agree with and why. So it can be done. It doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg, but I don't know how long that will be legal. So anyway, back to this article. Children's parents' greatest desire should be to teach their children God's truth. Many parents feel that an hour or two at church a week, coupled with their ability to correct wrong views taught in school, will offset any negative influence. It takes more than that. Think of this. Our children will spend approximately 1,200 hours in school in 1 year. That's 15,600 hours from K through 12. That's, kindergarten, preschool, whatever, through grade 12, which is senior in high school. In that time, they will be under the authority of their teachers, influenced by their peers, and taught from school books that often have a godless and humanistic worldview. Do you think they'll escape that without any influence? You have to work all the time at saying what did you, and I probably didn't do enough of this, what did you learn in school, what are they teaching you, and here's why I disagree with it. Statistics show that 90% of all Christian parents have their children educated by the government education system. Did you know that over 80% of all children who grew up in a Christian home and were churched leave the faith? 80%? 80%. Are your children's teachers teaching them the truth? No, they're not. Romans 12:2, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And 3 John 4, I have no greater joy than to hear my children are walking in truth. Sunshine Bible Academy seeks to provide the nurturing environment. Point 3, who's responsible for our children's education? At first glance, it seems obvious it would be the parents, yet many parents have the mindset that educating their children is in the hands of the government-run schools. However, Scripture is clear that it's the parents that have the main responsibility of educating and training their children in the Lord. When parents enlist others to help assist them in the educational process, they do not lose their responsibility or accountability to the Lord. It is the parents' God-given right and responsibility to choose properly who will assist them in this process. And so nobody's saying one person can teach their children everything children need to know, because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. They're saying you need to have a co-op of some sort, And that's what a lot of homeschool organizations do. That ours, the ones, back in the years I was doing it, I didn't know of any such thing. But then you have different specialties and it's good to have them interact with different parent teachers anyway. So it is unreasonable to expect teachers in public school settings to teach children about biblical truth. They're just not going to happen. They're forbidden to do so. And we all know what the twisting they did a few weeks back when I did one similar to this topic on how they get around teaching godless, humanist, anti-Christian religion in public schools and without calling it religion, yet getting the benefits of religion by being tax exempt and so forth. So it's total hypocrisy. Our society says that religious views or beliefs are to be separate from the education process and thus to life. This cannot be further from the truth, especially for Christians. As mentioned above, you cannot separate education from God, since knowing God, loving and serving Him is the end of education. Anyway, long run-on sentence because they forgot their spaces, but who parents partner with has a great influence on the student. Many teachers are influential in the lives and minds of these impressionable children. Jesus said, a student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. That doesn't mean they'll become like them in every respect, though. In context, it's talking about rising to the same level. Okay. All teachers have a worldview. We have to remember this. They are not objective. Scientists are not objective when it comes to philosophy and political views. And that will show itself in the classroom hour after hour. Can a biblical worldview and an unbiblical worldview exist together? No. Can believers and unbelievers partner together? No. That's what unequally yoked means. We're partnering actually with the government who is against that. Now, that's not to say every school is overtly anti-Christian, but if you are a public school, so my kids at least went to charter schools, there are certain things that are required to teach, and you're trusting teachers you may or may not know to be objective. But you really have to, especially as the years pass, and especially now, you have to ensure that that's happening if you're going to have someone else teach them. We're commanded in Scripture to have no fellowship with evil works of darkness, but rather expose them. Anyway, further, we must realize that education is never neutral. Never neutral. It's based on the worldview or beliefs of those writing the curriculum. In the educational process, ideas and values are being communicated to the children. Here's what the National Education Association said in their 2012-13 convention. Plans, activities, and programs must increase respect, understanding, acceptance, and sensitivity toward individuals and groups in a diverse society, including all these perverts. That's what they call diversity. The NEA also acknowledges that it's committed to a naturalistic, evolutionistic worldview and sees the public school system as the engine of social revolution. This is what public/government schools are all about. Naturalistic, evolutionistic worldview, and social revolution. The classrooms are being transformed into ideological laboratories for experimentation and indoctrination from human sexuality to postmodern understandings of truth. The sad thing is that these are not rats they're experimenting on, but children, your children. The NEA also believes, and has said in its own words, that the public school system should provide family planning counseling and access to birth control methods. What does that have? They have no business doing that without parental consent. So, and they have this verse here, Colossians 2:8, beware that anyone cheats you through philosophy and empty deceit according to the tradition of men, basic principles of the world and not according to Christ. All right, so, but here's one that a lot of people have fallen for. Shouldn't our children be salt and light? Short answer is yes, but somehow the adults seem to think they should be. Christians are called to be salt and light. We're called to be in the world, but not of it. We're called to have an impact on society. How are we doing that? For the glory of God. But that does not mean we put our children in harm's way. We are never called to put them under the influence of that which opposes the existence of God and Jesus' central role in human history. So Jesus said, if salt loses its saltiness, it's good for nothing. A significant role of proper Christian education is prepare children to be salt and light. We're to give them every opportunity to develop a biblical worldview and become rooted and grounded in their faith, so that when they're grown up, they'll be able to be salt and light. Many students leave Sunshine Academy prepared to engage the world, etc., etc. But the thing is that I think is brought out in another article or somewhere else in here that I didn't read, is that the children are still in development. They shouldn't be tasked with also being missionaries without their consent. Because if your children are forced to go to a public school and you say, well, we're Christians, but our children will be missionaries, did the children have a choice? Are they missionaries by volunteering to be missionaries, or are they forced into that situation and you're expecting them to be missionaries in a hostile environment that's probably worse than what you're encountering at work? And that isn't fair. All right? And then they talk about the expensive Christian school. I'm not going to go over that today. And even sending their children away to school, and they make their argument for that. Is Christian education really important? And this is what I was going over last week. Christian education is my passion. I wish this thing would stop dropping down. So it amazes me when I hear other Christians dismiss the whole concept or speak flippantly about it. And this I would include Bible study. While no school is perfect, Christian education plays a vital role and is essential. This is no knock on those who choose to work in public school as entirely different mission field. Those are adult teachers choosing to be missionaries, which are way different than kids that are forced to go to school and expected to be missionaries while they're in development. Satan is a master deceiver. He desperately wants us to think that Christian education is not really important and that public schools can educate our children just fine. They're not even doing that along with their indoctrination. They're not even educating them anymore. Christian education is vital because, one, the public school system has an agenda and it's not just about evolution. There are many things that are against us in every way. I've heard parents say that they know their children is hearing about evolution, but they talk to them at home, so everything's fine. Yes, kids are good at refuting evolution and staying true to their belief in a creator. That's not the problem. The issue is that the public school system is pushing way more than evolution, and most parents don't even know the assault of dangerous philosophies their children are facing. It's very humanistic at its core, and it pushes the progressive, or I would say regressive, agenda every way it can. From a young age, students are taught that there's no absolute truth, that homosexuality is an acceptable alternative, that some people are more valuable than others, and that socialism is the key to the future of our society. We wondered how this could happen in America. That's how. Education system, the public demanded, taxpayer extorted public schools. The problem is that these philosophies are taught very subtly, not so much anymore, weaved into illustrations and application questions. A mature adult might even not even catch them, much less a child or a teenager. So this teaching is dangerous and subversive to parents, and as parents are not in the classroom with our students, we don't even know what to refute. And the next point, our kids need to do more than just survive. They're not there to see who can sink or swim. We're supposed to be nurturing and protecting them as they grow up. Can a child survive the ever-rising onslaught of unbiblical philosophies and graduate from a public school with their faith intact? Of course they can, and they often do, but don't we want more than that? It's sink or swim. It's not a good attitude. Since when, they go on here, maybe this is the part I was thinking of, is it the goal to raise kids who made it? Yea, you survived public school indoctrination. Don't we want kids to understand God's truth and how to apply them to every situation in life? Don't we want our kids to have a deep, meaningful relationship with God? Do we want them to be everything they can be and to use their lives for His glory? Yes, we want that, but then we send them to public school. And they're going on here, I'm not saying a kid who attends public school cannot be used of God. That would be ridiculous. What I am saying is that a main purpose of Christian schools should be to intentionally disciple students. Christian schools should not be just the absence of wrong philosophies. They should be the infusion of truth into every aspect of the day, from academics to peer relationships to sports. Our schools, our kids are still in training. They're in development, as I mentioned before. It may be a mission field, but the missionaries should be mature adults. Okay, so I didn't miss that part. Not our kids. Why? Because they're still in training themselves. To illustrate, they give a little thing here. Let's imagine the government wants to send spies to infiltrate an Al-Qaeda training facility. Hope I don't get shut down for even just reading this. Let's say subversive training facility that uses propaganda and indoctrination to radicalize its recruits. The general carefully selects his candidate, a 13-year-old teenager. He's a loyal American, the son of a Navy SEAL, who is smart, independent, loves his country. They send him into the base where he will train and gather intel for the next 6 years to help him remember the truth of freedom. They periodically schedule secret meetings and smuggle in American pamphlets. What's the problem with this scenario? Boy is only 13, has had no training. He's still at an impressionable age and has not been taught how to resist the indoctrination of the extremist. Even if he remains true to his country, it's unlikely that he will emerge from this facility with the same system of beliefs. This is what we're doing, sending even much younger kids than 13 into the sawmill of government schools. And like I said, it's gotten worse, way worse, since my kids were little. And hi to more people in chat. And he's saying, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying this is a spy organization or anything, the public schools, but we are fighting a spiritual battle. And as we saw in the first two links, the articles I went over, it's not even just a Christian issue anymore. Children are impressionable. We need to give them the best education possible and not subject them to this onslaught. Okay, so there's an academy, and they make some good points in here. I'm not saying send away your children to Christian schools, but sending them away to government schools, even if they come home every day and you barely see them because of all the homework, and that's deliberate, and we'll get into some more about that. But, we're asking too much of them, I think. So, again, let me make sure I'm not getting behind on my notes here. Especially now with medical tyranny rampant, it has become unconscionable for Christians to subject their children to pressures many adults can't endure. Do children have any choice in whether they're to be missionaries, as I mentioned before? They're risking their lives, their souls, their worldview, their mental health to be there. How would any adult like to be pressured like that every day, all day? And again, even when my kids were in school, this is, they're all grown up now. I agonize between the godless school environment and the need for more socialization that I couldn't provide because I'm not a social person myself. And the local homeschool group I was in wasn't particularly helpful in that regard. But today, I wouldn't be the least bit conflicted since the environment has become so utterly toxic. I mean, it's not even a question anymore. I worried about whether they would be able to get good jobs or get into good school. And I kind of straddled the fence a little bit. I did homeschool them in the early years. And they had no trouble adapting to a STEM school, a charter school. But now I wouldn't consider it. So my question is, why aren't the churches more focused on the education of Christians, young or old? They've become like lazy parents who let their children decide for themselves, like I mentioned earlier, what they're going to believe and take no interest in their development. I mean, that's kind of a very, very, very hands-off approach that a lot of churches have. But because of this tragic failure over generations, it will soon be illegal anywhere in the world to homeschool or have Christian schools. It will be. It's just a matter of time. And did you know that some of the top colleges in the U.S. and England started out as Christian schools? Did you know that? What happened? The boiling frog, that illustration, if you put a frog in a pot of water and then slowly bring the water to a boil, the frog won't jump out because it doesn't detect a gradual change, and that's how this happened. The churches basically fell asleep at the switch. And so that brings me to the next article. This is Answers in Genesis. I'm not endorsing the whole site and everything. I'm a young earth creationist, but there's other things they teach that I don't agree with. But anyway. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, once Christian. Many of America's and England's oldest universities were established as religious institutions, but now they advocate evolutionary thinking, and that's not all. As we just said, there's a lot more bad stuff that they're doing. Socialization is not worth all the things they're doing to kids in public schools now. Anyway, most of the colleges in the U.S. that started over 300 years ago were Bible-proclaiming schools originally. Harvard and Yale, originally Puritan, and Princeton, originally Presbyterian, once had rich Christian histories. Harvard was named after a Christian minister. Yale was started by clergymen, and Princeton's first year of class was taught by Reverend Jonathan Dickinson. Princeton's crest still says, in Latin, for under God she flourishes. Under God. In the UK, the earliest university-type establishment was probably the college established by the Celtic preacher St. Illityd, however you pronounce that, AD 500. Oxford University was established by various religious orders. Whether they're Christian or not is another question, but the point is that they were trying to teach some kind of religious values, okay? Cambridge University was established in 1209 by Christian leaders. St. Andrews, Scotland's oldest university, was founded principally for the teaching and study of theology. The commitment of these religious founders might be suspect, but many of the later colleges were founded by Bible-believing Christians. The University of Edinburgh had a thoroughly evangelical beginning, being founded under Presbyterian auspices. Even the writer of this article's alma mater, Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, had Christian roots when it was founded in 1869. The school motto was God willing. By the time this person attended in the 1990s, there was almost no vestige of that Christian heritage left. In fact, the university emphatically teaches evolution over millions of years, blatantly rejects the possibility of biblical authority, that the Bible is true, authoritative, and what we need to adjust our beliefs and actions to its teaching. So what happened to cause so many schools to abandon their Christian roots? They're saying here, accepting a naturalistic worldview and compromising Scripture were the first cracks in these universities' Christian foundations. These cracks led to collapse their Christian heritage. You all know the illustration of the camel that puts its nose under a tent where somebody is and says, I just want to keep my nose warm. Can I just poke my nose into your tent? And that person says, sure. And then after a while, the whole head comes through, and they're like, okay, a little bit at a time. Next thing you know, the person has no room in the tent and has to get out because the camel is taken over. Gradualistic change is how these things happen. And the problem is that when some Christians see this happening, see the nose in the tent, the other Christians who don't see it are like, you're just being a naysayer, you're just intolerant, you're just resisting change, you're a Luddite. These are nice people, let them in. And they don't see the roots of these problems. Even though you can tell them articles like this, right? So, the book, The Sacred and Secular Universities from the year 2000, is an insightful study by Roberts and Turner to secular historians who show no evidence of overt Christian bias. They discuss the change in American universities from Christian worldview to naturalistic philosophy. They point out that universities across the board fell first in the area of science. In the sciences, the critical departure from this hegemonic construct took place in the 1870s. Generations ago. They add that methodological naturalism was the critical innovation. As soon as you let evolution in the door, that's the first crack of getting rid of anything biblical at all, even if it isn't science related. And the I forget which scientist it was who said, it might have been Hubble or somebody like that, who made the remark, we can't allow a divine foot in the door. They see us as the camel. Anyway, naturalism opposes God's word in Genesis, foundational book of the Bible. And that was the first crack in the foundation. The cracks first appeared in the late 1700s, early 1800s, culminating with the influence of Charles Liddell's 3 volumes of Principles of Geology in the 1830s. Belief in an old Earth seriously wounded widespread acceptance of the flood and the biblical chronology, and Lyell just finished off the victim and nailed the coffin shut. This old earth belief permeated universities by mid-1800s, setting the stage for Darwin's evolutionary model in 1859. Origin of Species, and something about favored races is the whole title of that. And his later work on human evolution, the descent, not ascent, of man in 1871, both of which required long ages. After Christian universities adopted these compromises, the slide from biblical Christianity to naturalism soon followed. That's why I was talking last week about compromise and how deadly it is. There's, in our church merger, there's a foot in the door now that women are restricted in some way, even if there's a technicality that made whoever was involved in the decision that had to be on the table. But that made everybody happy, but me. But compromise is deadly. That doesn't mean you can't compromise on gray areas, but our faith and the principles taught in the New Testament especially are not gray areas when it comes to spiritual gifts and the nature of salvation. Robertson Turner explained why Christians compromised with naturalistic scientists. The determination of scientists to bring phenomena within the purview of naturalistic description evoked a mixed response from Christians outside the scientific community. That's the problem, the mixed response. Many clergymen and theologians, most notably those who embrace a liberal approach to Christian thought, sought to avoid that outcome by joining scientists in embracing an immanentist conception of God's relationship to the world. That is to say, that they think that God did evolution, right? An immanent position holds that deity would be bound within the universe, which is what these naturalistic scientists were teaching. In other words, they were pushing deism, which incidentally is what's being taught in a lot of the flat earth community is deism. It's not Christianity. And I saw that 6 years ago, and I did some videos about it, where the door is open to belief in a creator, but that, as it says in James, the demons believe in God and shudder. You say you believe in one God, that's great, but the demons believe that. That doesn't make somebody saved, it's just to believe in God. It's to believe Jesus rose from the dead, and Jesus is God in the flesh, otherwise he couldn't have died for our sins, etc., etc. Undoubtedly, the compromise with belief in an ancient earth and evolution contributed greatly to the spiritual downfall of these institutions. So that's how it happens. Once Christians began adopting a naturalistic view, including evolution or earth history over millions of years, it didn't take long for the rest of their faith to come crumbling down. They had given up the Bible as their starting point, and had accepted naturalistic science instead, and I've done things on the Bible and science before. Yes, more than a flame. Genesis is written, and a young earth creationist. Genesis is written as literal history. That's the genre. So should be taken as such. And that includes earth shape. They can't just, as others have pointed out, that Michael Heiser especially, he believes in evolution, he believes the Bible is all allegory, theological messaging, but even he will say the Bible teaches a young, flat, stationary earth. I mean, as an expert in ancient languages, I'm going to pay attention to him in his area of expertise, but he's not a theologian. Anyway, the demise of former Christian universities should be a lesson to individuals, churches, Christian colleges, and universities and seminaries to stand firm on the Bible's clear teachings and beware of any doctrine that's not biblically sound. All right, so just to make that point about how education was pretty much, a lot of formal education was begun by Christians for Christian reasons, but compromise turned them into their exact opposites over time. Because Christians didn't know where to stand because they don't hold the Bible in high regard. And when you tell people it's not important to study the Bible, you don't hold it in high regard. There's just no other way around that. Hey, Chow and everybody else I haven't said hi to. So, of course, this organization, like I said, is blind to the irony of rejecting biological evolution while retaining and defending evolution-dependent cosmology. But be aware also of the built-in bias of all government education against the Bible. You might remember my video, Organized Religion. Let me get you that link real quick because I happen to have it handy. On Organized Religion, that's the one I mentioned before about where I went into how they twist things. But let me show you one last article today and to give you that link too. This is Illinois Family Institute. This is John Dewey, one of the fathers of the U.S. educational system. There is no God and there is no soul. Hence, there is no need for the props of traditional religion. With dogma and creed excluded, oh no, they weren't, they were just exchanged, then immutable truth is dead and buried. Immutable truth is dead and buried. There is no room for a fixed and natural law or permanent moral absolutes. This is the guy who founded the educational system in the U.S., and I think he also did so in Russia. Dewey Decimal System. John Dewey's public schools replaced Christianity with collectivist humanism. And that's what we got in the world today. Widely recognized as the founding father of America's progressive public school system, John Dewey was a man on an unprecedented religious mission. With more fervor and devotion than many Christian missionaries or Islamic jihadists, he set out to win America over to his religious worldview. Like the collectivist whose shoulders he stood upon, government-controlled education was Dewey's weapon of choice. And now, more than a century after he began, it's clear that Dewey and his disciples are winning big time. When Dewey launched his crusade to erode the faith and individualism of Americans, the United States of America was among the most devoutly Christian nations the world had ever known. Church and the Bible were an inseparable part of life and education for virtually everyone. In 1643, in the Articles of Confederation of the United Colonies, the earliest settlers in America declared, "We all came into these parts of America with one and the same end and aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ." The first settlers were definitely trying to form a Christian nation. Hey, Nathan, good to see you, and Tony, and whoever else I missed it. And to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in purity with peace. 1643. Centuries later, that was still the prevailing sentiment. In 1856, for example, the U.S. House of Representatives, which represents the people more directly than other federal bodies, put it this way: the great vital and conservative element in our system is the belief of our people in the pure doctrines and divine truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Very specific, not just God, not deism, as some of the people will like to quote, anti-Christians will like to quote some of the founders of the country who were deists. They know it was never a Christian nation. That's not true. We're going back to 1600s here, and then the 1800s. The House of Representatives, the Congress, said, vital and conservative element in our system is belief of the people in the pure doctrines and divine truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Very, very specific. Numerous similar declarations came from Congress before and after that. In 1892, meanwhile, even in the U.S. Supreme Court declared in Holy Trinity Church versus United States that America is a Christian nation. Did you know that? You'll say, no, it's not. Well, you may not be able to find that specifically in the Constitution, but the Constitution isn't the sum total of everything that made America. As recently as the 1970s, 9 out of 10 Americans still identified as Christians. Today, however, just 2/3 of Americans identify. It was 90%. Now you're lucky if it's really 50 or 40%. And the numbers plummet. Even in the Bible Belt today, that is to say the Midwest primarily and the South, significantly less than half of Americans attend church weekly, with church attendance dropping. I'm not concerned about church attendance, but there's other reasons for that too. But anyway, even among those self-proclaimed Christians, studies and surveys by the Nehemiah Institute and other organizations reveal that the vast majority reject the biblical worldview that defined Americans for centuries. So that's gone. And with the results we're seeing today, with the decline of Christianity and the biblical worldview among Americans, the free political institution they gave rise to have eroded too, if we're looking for roots of things. Probably the most important single figure responsible for the rapid implosion of Christianity in America and across the West more broadly was Dewey. This guy, in case you just got here, John Dewey, who absolutely hated God and Christianity and sought to replace it with his own religion, and did. In a previous article in the series, Dewey's well-known collectivist views were documented, including his fascination with the Soviet Union and his desire to radically transform the United States into a socialist nation. Education is how they did it. So I had to say to anybody trying to fix things here, you have to start with the school system. Everything else came from that. Parents have to retake education or nothing's going to change. The foundation for this transformation was laid in the early 1800s by communist Robert Owen, whose writings on education inspired the Prussian government, that is to say, German, to take over education. Decades later, Massachusetts Secretary of Education Horace Mann, a collectivist and utopian, would import that status system to America. So America didn't just suddenly flip a switch a couple of years ago and go communist. The roots go deep, but the Christian roots go deeper. Yeah, Dewey Decimal System, he did invent that. Finally, Dewey would seize control over that architecture, mix it with Soviet ideas and psychology, and provide an enormous boost to its effectiveness in fundamentally transforming America. Part 3 in this series focused primarily on Dewey's views on politics, the economy, and education, but his religion, described as atheism, but in reality going beyond that, is a crucial part of the puzzle as well. It's also inseparable from his views and everything else. The high-profile reformer didn't seek to conceal his religious views from the public, and in fact, he was a key player and one of the first signatories behind the first Humanist Manifesto. This important religious document essentially fused faith in the non-existence of God, with a fanatical devotion to socialism and communism, creating potentially one of the most dangerous religions of all time. Why do you think, remember that video back, I linked to it earlier, why do you think they twist and writhe so much in order to call themselves not a religion, to get religious benefits, and be the religion of the government? The very first tenet of this new religion was a direct and open attack on the Bible, specifically the Bible, not the Quran, not the Vedas, not the Book of Mormon, and the prevailing religious orthodoxy of the time, in particular the notion that an omnipotent and omniscient God had created the universe and the earth as described in Genesis 1:1. Quote, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created, reads the first tenet of Dewey's religious manifesto. Note the honesty. Dewey and company recognized that their belief system was in fact a religion. That's why once they got in power, they forbid anything else, especially Christianity. They'll teach you any other religion but this one. Beyond the giant implications for religion, the political and economic significance of this statement is profound too. America's founding fathers argued that this was a self-evident truth that God had created people and endowed them with certain, it's not inalienable, it's unalienable. People mispronounce that all the time. Unalienable rights. That means you can't take them away. As explained in the Declaration of Independence, it says unalienable, not inalienable. Anyway, indeed, the very purpose of government, they said, was to protect these God-given rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which incidentally is an abortion issue too, the right to life. Babies have the right to life. But under Dewey's religion, there is no God, and if there is no God, then there can be no God-given rights. In fact, Dewey was openly hostile to the view that anyone had an unalienable right to private property. That's why, unless you have something called an alloidal title, you don't own property in the United States. You're renting it because you have to pay taxes on it year after year. And if you don't, they'll take the property back and whatever's attached to it, which is your house, even if it's paid for. Well, Dewey was the spearhead on the influential public face of it. He had, of course, the whole humanist society to help him. Anyway, after all, if there's no God to prohibit stealing private property or even murder, then there's no transcendent reason why anybody should have unalienable rights to anything. That's why the governments today say you have no rights. This is a recipe for totalitarian rule, and that's what we're in right now. Exactly, Nathan. Okay, I'm sorry I can't pay a lot of attention to the chat yet. I will do that when I'm done reading, and we're going to run a little over. The socialist and collectivist mentality behind this was all spelled out clearly in the Humanist Manifesto itself. Quote, the humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive, and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted, they wrote. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. It all sounds nice on paper, but it's never worked. Even in America, they don't think they mentioned that in this article. One of the first settlers groups tried socialism. Everybody was supposed to just, grow whatever and then pool it all and divide it up equally. Well, that meant that lazy people who did absolutely nothing got the same reward as people who worked hard. And the next winter, the whole colony almost starved to death because the hard workers said, why should we? And they had no motive. So then they gave up socialism and said, okay, everybody grow what you want. And there was plenty. Freedom works. But now we haven't had true capitalism in a long, long time because there's so much government intervention. And what they're doing now is the famous 5-year plans that the communist nations have always used, and they've never worked. And they decided let's just copy that failure here. This is the exact same rhetoric, back to the article, used by every communist tyrant of the 20th century. The profit motive is bad, so radical change, including collective ownership of the means of production, must be instituted. This has been the guiding vision of such luminaries as Castro, Lenin, Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, Chavez, Maduro, the Kim dynasty, and many more. Countless millions have died as a direct result of these ideas being imposed. No, the government and the experts don't know how best to run your life. They're not your parents. They're worse than anything you can imagine. They will, they think they know better. They really believe they know better, but they don't. Look at the Georgia Guidestones. They think they know better. They know what's best for us, but they don't. All they know how to do is kill people and make the living miserable. So, individualistic American Christians with a devotion to God and God-given liberty were hardly going to just give up their ingrained beliefs, their hard-won freedom, or their property rights without a fight. So Dewey and his disciples, often funded with capitalist Rockefeller money, and by the way, the problem with capitalism is not capitalism, it's greed and the human frailty, the human sin, and that power corrupts. Capitalism for them at the top, but communism for everybody else is what they want. Understood that education would be crucial to changing people's attitudes. That's how they destroyed America. It had to be done quietly, though. Change must come gradually, Dewey explained in an 1898 essay calling for schools to place much less emphasis on reading and writing. Did you see that? Place much less emphasis on reading and writing and much more emphasis on collectivism. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. That's the frog in the pot of boiling water. And again, Christians have a nasty habit of attacking anybody with distant vision and seeing these things coming down the road. We're not well received because we're rocking the boat, and they don't like that. They want peace at any price. A national religion. Charles F. Potter, a fellow signer of the Humanist Manifesto and a Dewey associate, spelled out explicitly what few Americans were willing to see or understand at the time. Education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every public school is a school of humanism. He wrote in 1930, Humanism, a New Religion. What can theistic Sunday school, meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children, do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teachings? Potter asked rhetorically. Of course, the answer is practically nothing, as the humanists well understood. They had the educational system they were going to win. A few decades after Potter's bombshell, the U.S. Supreme Court would formalize it all. After centuries of being in the center of American education, the Bible and prayer in public schools, as mandated by state and local authorities from the time of public education came into being, were suddenly found to be unconstitutional. Supposedly, Bible and prayer in local schools represented a violation of the First Amendment's prohibition on Congress of passing laws respecting an establishment of religion. I'm emphasizing those words for a reason. The legal logic, or lack thereof, as I went over in that other video a while back, required the court to twist itself into pretzels. Like I said, I've done a whole video on that pretzel twisting. And it never said that you have to expunge all religious expression in public. It just said the state can't mandate that, can't mandate which religion it is. A well-educated public would have seen right through the deception. After all, when the First Amendment was written and ratified and long afterward, most of the states actually had established churches. But after decades of declining educational standards and humanist propaganda in schools, that is to say, it's a cancer, the monumental decision that would transform America was meekly accepted by much of the populace, especially Christians who should have known better. At least one Justice Potter Stewart understood what was really happening, and he said, quote, "Refusal to permit religious exercises thus is seen not as the realization of state neutrality, but rather as the establishment of a religion of secularism," he wrote in his dissent. And he's used the secularism to describe what Dewey and his cohorts would have referred to as humanism. In short, under the guise of upholding the Constitution, the U.S. Supreme Court did the very thing the Constitution was supposed to prevent Congress from doing. The Supreme Court betrayed the country. It established a national religion and compelled Americans to support it with their taxes. That is to say, we are forced to, but at the point of a gun, literally you can be jailed for not doing it, and more significantly, with their children. The reason for the First Amendment was clear. The founders were worried that some denomination of Protestant Christians might have tried to establish itself as the official national religion. They would never or could not have imagined, less than 2 centuries after creating a new Christian nation, that the institutions they established would force anti-Christian humanism on the American people via public education and judicial fiat. But that's what happened. Government schools across the U.S. to this day pretend to be neutral on matters of religion, even while they indoctrinate children into believing in humanism as if humanism were not a religious belief system. Dewey and his fellow humanists recognized it as a religion, though, and federal courts have too. As recently as 2014, a federal court in Oregon declared as much. The court finds that secular humanism is a religion for Establishment Clause purposes. Remember how I went over this in detail a few weeks back? For Establishment Clause purposes, wrote Judge Answer Haggerty in the ruling, which didn't concern schools in this case, but was nonetheless highly relevant to education. And I went over how disingenuous that was for them to say, for Establishment Clause. You can be a religion here and you don't have to be a religion there, so it benefits you both ways. Today, Dewey's totalitarian religion of humanism is being inculcated in the mind of every child attending public school, often by unwitting teachers who don't even realize it. Polls, that's kind of redundant, polls now consistently show over half of young Americans identify as socialists. Dewey would be proud, but Americans should be outraged. Especially Christians should be outraged. The latest tyranny that we're in now would not have been possible had Christians stood their ground and defended the Bible, which they need to study first. You can't stand up for Jesus, as the song goes. If you don't know what he said, you won't study it. You just want quick little devotional guides and to keep the peace at any price. That's how this happens. So, let me take a look at the chat. I know I've missed quite a lot, but let me try to go back as far as I can here. Read off some names, at least as far back as I can see. Soundly, James Mason Clutch, Rachel Menifee, More Than a Flame, Divergent Droid, Old Hoss Radmer. I know I say that backwards all the time. Matthew Eastman, I think I mentioned Humdrum Yokel, AJM. According to 3-time New York Teacher of the Year John Taylor Gatto, our system of education is based on the Prussian system and is designed to indoctrinate on purpose. Yep. Let's see. In Germany, homeschooling is prohibited. Yeah, somebody's got to do it, AJM. Let's see. Most private schools are held accountable under draconian progressive education standards as well. Yeah, they're all being pressured, at least. Many private schools are the most eager to employ equal opportunity standards. Yeah, and government money is a big deal too. And that's why Christian schools tend to be more expensive, because we don't get government money because they would require compromise. Currently, Germans hardly push back or rebel. At least many cooperate in this pandemic, watching over others to comply. Yep. Entire educational system is warped. Yep. Can't single out one ethnic group. Yep. I think I mentioned that before, but anyway, Germans tend to accept government. There are local variances. Saxonia seems to be more awake, the East more than the West. Affluence will do that. Yep. Remember my video, Brave New 1984? Let's see. Encourage kids to get involved with Youth for Christ Club in school. Yeah, at least if you have no choices, make sure that there are Christian groups and protect the freedom of the Christian groups to exist under the Constitution. And there are legal organizations for Christians that will go to bat for you if the school system tries to trample on your constitutional rights. Let's see. Reading. Hope I didn't see Camo Clutch. I think I read your name. And I mentioned that about studying at home, what's legal and what isn't. To the best of my knowledge, at least that's how it was when I homeschooled. Let's see. Brainwashing people into thinking they're evolved pond scum is the goal of modern education. Because once you got that, you got everything else. Jesuits have corrupted educational system. Not just them, though. I mean, these humanists are also, some of the biggest influencers. But there are secret societies, or societies with secrets, I don't care which way it's worded, that was it Wilson or one of the U.S. presidents that said there's a quote about there is a system so interlocked, so secret and powerful that you have to only, don't speak above your breath when you talk about them. A cabal that is worldwide, and I think it's at least somewhat involved in these secret societies that are in every community around the world. Let's see. As far as going anywhere to be safe, unless you want to live deep in the Amazon or someplace like that, where you might, encounter a lot other problems threats to life and limb in other ways, you pretty much have to say goodbye to life as you know it if you want to escape the New World Order. Unless you're a Christian and the rapture happens, and that's what I'm hoping for. But let's see. Looking at the chat. Sorry. Why they stopped learning Latin. Latin and Greek are very foundational in English and German and a lot of other languages. So I don't see any downside to learning them as a way to understand your own language. But at the same time, especially in the U.S., we haven't had much incentive, even though they require foreign language in school and high school and college. They should teach it sooner. But the thing is that most of the time we don't encounter people who don't speak English, so it's hard to sell here. Let's see. Trying to catch up with chat. Just see also Timothy here. Yep, I stream at 2 p.m. Eastern every Sunday. That's an hour and a quarter ago. I usually don't go over this long. Good survey. Good to see you too. Let's see. They are pushing false agendas in school because they're impressionable. Yep, and their parents don't care for the most part. You're welcome, Camo. And hi to also Mike and Tony. I have a theory, causation, not correlation. At every point, they upped the educational standards for teachers from simply a bachelor's degree. I guess they needed more indoctrination, eh? Let's see. Forced to wear masks. Yeah, that's not socialization. I know I touched on that before when I saw your comment, but they are anti-socializing. They're putting kids in public schools and then keeping them 6 feet apart with dividers and little pods that they have to sit in. Reminds me of the movie WALL-E. Let's see. Thanks for that article link again there, Chow. I wouldn't say so much that Catholics infiltrated Protestant education, that the Protestant education didn't let go enough of the Prussian model and decided to just keep a lot of the perfunctory religious rights sort of things that should have been discarded. But yeah, so all right, just trying, moving goalpost. How did it get to this point? Yeah, this has been the whole video we're doing today. Let's see. Don't want to say I told you so when it's too late and people realize what's up, but yeah, I mean, very few of people told anybody so, but better late than never, I guess. All right. Could we also assume that this version of education was done deliberately by occultists? I'm pretty sure that the humanists weren't just humanists, and that the occultists, wholeheartedly approve anything to get rid of Christianity, because it's only Jesus Christ, the Bible, salvation by faith that they really, really had to get rid of. Let's see. Copernicus. Not going to get into that right now. Good to see Nathan here also. Your Friday, good to see you too. The weakness of so many modern Christians is that they feel too much at home in the world. Yes, exactly. In their effort to achieve restful adjustment to unregenerate society, they have lost their pilgrim character and become an essential part of the very moral order against which they are sent to protest. Yep, being salt and light has just not been happening. Yep, Tozer has a lot of good quotes. I don't agree with everything he said, but he had some good things to say. All right, trying to catch up here with the chat still. Somehow cannot believe that Dewey... Okay, well, I went over that thing with Dewey, and what's the other guy's name? I forget. Some other ones I mentioned. And about Nathan mentioned about the Simpsons. Dewey's decimal system is the devil. Yep. Let's see. It's only if you follow the system of commercial law. Well, yeah, that's another thing that, you know what, when it comes to playing legal games, it's a very dangerous game, and most of us are not. I mean, if anybody realistically thinks that by asserting natural law that we're going to get out of anything that in the system that has control of the world, I just wouldn't recommend that. But yep, alloidal titles. I've been around a while to know, and the message boards and conspiracy theorists. Everything conspiracy theorists have said has come true. We're still marginalized. That very term, conspiracy theorist, was invented by the government goons anyway to marginalize. Let's see, chickens and eggs. Government going over Christianity, yes, exactly. And that's the thing, is for the time being, it isn't necessarily Christians that are being overtly criminalized, but just people who question the government. But our day is coming rapidly. If this is what they can do to people, not for religious reasons, but for political reasons, the religious reasons will be a pushover. Let's see, Emlu, public school workforce said that they will take anyone that controls the classroom as a substitute teacher. There's nobody subbing. You don't have to have a bachelor's degree. So they are just saying that the kids are wild and out of control, it sounds like. That's a tall order when the parents are so hands-off and allow their children to get to that point where they're wild animals. Of course, that's not a new problem. There have been movies, let's see, what was it called? It was back in the 50s or 60s. The Blackboard Jungle or something like that, about schools in New York that they were so wild and out of control a long time ago. So not a new thing, but the consequences of bad parenting or of making it so hard for parents that you can't raise your own children. And that was from another quote from John Dewey on the Humanist Manifesto, was to take children away from their parents, to take the students, keep them in school so long and give them so much homework and extracurricular activities that their parents could not have enough influence on them, and that's exactly what happened. I never believed that the homework was necessary, and I always thought that if children were being educated properly, they wouldn't need homework unless they were having trouble in a certain area. Excessive homework just means the schools aren't doing their jobs, in my opinion. So, anyway, I think I finally caught up with the chat. And it's going on 20 minutes later than normal. So, I think we'll end it there. And who knows what we'll talk about next week. As I've said, if I don't have anything to talk about, I'll run a premiere of something I did at least a year ago. But thanks for coming, and we will see you next week. If I can just find the right buttons around here. Here we go.